In today's video, we're going to be discussing some updated NHL trade rumors concerning the Tampa Bay Lightning, Calgary Flames, and New York Rangers. Plus, we also have the latest rumors on who might the candidates be for the next GM of the Minnesota Wild. We'll get into all the latest coming up next. So welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, I have some trade rumors I want to discuss with you here today. There's a lot of moves that still need to be made this offseason. Even though it's starting to slow down a little bit, there's still some teams over the cap and lots of RFAs that are going to be commanding some big salaries left to sign, which is kind of still generating a lot of talk of what moves might be made. Now let's first get started with the New York Rangers. Now, after all the moves that they've made recently, they find themselves over the cap, and we've discussed this a few days back on what they might do. At that point, many of the comments on the video, as well as my kind of gut reaction, was that they might go down the route of a buyout, even though it might be expensive. They maybe buy out a defenseman like Kevin Shattenkirk or Brendan Smith, but that window to buy players out is closing quickly. They've only got a few hours left as I record this video, and as of right now, at least it's not looking like we're going to be getting any news that that's the direction that they're heading. Now, that very well still could happen. There's still time for the announcement to come, but as I record this, there's only a couple hours left before the cutoff, and right now we don't have any inside information to suggest that that's going to happen. So if that's not the case, that only leaves the option of going down the route of a trade. Now, of course, according to Larry Brooks here from the New York Post, he's indicated from several sources around the league that Chris Kreider's name, he said, is everywhere and is being heavily discussed as a trade candidate for the Rangers. Of course, amongst all the players that we've discussed as potential trade bait for the Rangers, I think he has the most value. He only has 1 year left on his contract, so trading for him now as opposed to at the trade deadline gives him a full season with whatever team acquires him, which obviously gives them an opportunity to kind of test things out and see if they want to sign him longer term or just use him as a rental for the season. Either way, Kreider I think would get them a decent return, but of course, regardless of what they do, they're going to need to take something that's not going to impact their immediate salary cap situation. So they're probably going to be looking for prospects or draft picks or something in return here that's not going to be affecting the immediate salary cap. The other part of this that might seem a little bit surprising, as we discussed the other day, was that trading a player now under over the cap and needing to become cap compliant kind of really diminishes their value. You're trading from a position of weakness, like we've seen with other teams here that are making trades just to clear space because they're over. Teams are going to take advantage of that, and the returns are going to probably be a little bit underwhelming. To sell low on a player like Kreider might not seem like the best move, but at the same time, the buyouts we were discussing on Smith or Shattenkirk could certainly prove expensive over the next few years and have a little bit more of a longer term implication on the cap. I guess it depends on what they feel is better in that regard, but as of right now, it looks as though a trade will be made, and likely will be Kreider, or the other player that's been mentioned is Namestnikov, but really I don't think Namestnikov has a ton of value. Ever since he's gone to the Rangers, he's been inconsistent. Even when he was with Tampa, like I said before, I feel like they kind of played him up higher in the lineup to get him some extra points. They kind of boost his value, almost like a pump and dump type of situation, where they pumped up his value, traded him along, and he hasn't really found his stride with the Rangers ever since. So we'll see what happens with either of these players. Kreider has more value, but as we record this video, it's looking like a buyout is very unlikely, and Chris Kreider would be the most likely candidate to go to make the Rangers cap compliant here over the next few weeks before training camp opens. Now jumping over to the Tampa Bay Lightning, we saw a move with them and the Ottawa Senators the other day with him trading Ryan Callahan's contract to the Senators in exchange for Mike Condon. Of course, they also swapped draft picks in that trade as well. That trade certainly was quite valuable to Tampa to free up a lot of cap space here as they need to sign Braden Point and Adam Ernie. And of course, Braden Point's contract especially is not going to come cheap. He's had a couple of phenomenal seasons in the NHL and has proven to be one of the top young players around the league who's going to be commanding some pretty big bucks here. Now, of course, with acquiring Condon, that gives them a lot of goaltending options on their roster. It's pretty safe to say that your Tampa goaltending tandem will be Vasilevsky and McElhinney, who they signed as a free agent. That kind of leaves goaltenders like Louis Domingue and now Mike Condon. They've also got Scott Wedgwood in the mix as well. So it looks as though that Domingue is on his way out. We've even got confirmation from GM Julian Brisebois that they are actively trying to find him a new home and are hoping that they will find that for him before the start of next season. I think Domingue actually did a pretty decent job, all things considered, last year for Tampa. They just saw an opportunity to upgrade the position in the form of McElhinney, who's been one of the league's best backups in the last few years. So they took advantage of that. And obviously Domingue kind of gets himself out of a job, unfortunately, but hopefully another team will catch on. There's a handful of teams around the league who you could look at and say, you know what, they could certainly use either a third goaltender or an upgrade in that area as backup that he could maybe go to camp and battle for a roster spot. So certainly difficult to say, but the Tampa Bay Lightning are actively trying to trade Louis Domingue, like I said, which would give you Vasilevsky and McElhinney at the NHL level and Mike Condon and Scott Wedgwood at the American Hockey League level. Now, right now, after trading Callahan and then putting Condon down to the minors, that gives them just a little bit over $11 million in salary cap space to sign Braden Point and Adam Ernie. Of course, they move Louis Domingue, who's making $1.1 million. That's going to move them up over $12 million. So if they can get that all accomplished here soon, then that should give them plenty of space here in order to get these guys under contract and kind of complete their offseason. The other information that I've seen regarding Braden Point is I would not be surprised to see a contract come sooner than later. I know earlier in the offseason, many of us felt that Mitch Marner would be setting the tone here for the other contracts, that many RFAs were waiting for him to go first. I think that's kind of starting to shift a little bit and starting to change, and I would not be surprised to see Braden Point's contract be done well ahead a lot of these other ones and kind of set the market and set the tone here for a lot of the other guys. Personally, based on the Leafs salary cap situation, I think there's going to be much later into the season before Marner signs. And it might be done before the season actually starts, or maybe just the first few days or something to that effect. But given the fact of what they need to do with LTIR to make everything work, I think the season will start and then he'll sign right after. At least that's my gut instinct on how that's going to go. And a lot of these other RFAs are looking at that and saying that, you know what, I don't want to wait that long. I'd like to be able to go to training camp with a contract, start my season on time, so they don't have any delays. They all see what happened to William Nylander last year, and I don't think Braden Point and a lot of the other guys want to be in that kind of predicament. So I would not be surprised to see a Point contract done in the near future. And based on comments from GM Julien Brisebois talking about how a lot of their other top players have taken shorter term contracts, that short term bridge deal like we've seen with many of them, and then inked longer term deals a couple years later, I think that's the direction that they really want to go with Braden Point. I'm not sure 100% if his camp are going to agree with that, and that's what he'll end up signing for, but it looks as though I think that's the direction they like to go, maybe like a 3-year bridge, and then follow that up with a 7 or 8 year contract extension once we get into near the end of that one. That's likely where they're heading, but I guess we'll see. But obviously all these moves that they've made recently and what they're going to do with Louis Domingue will all lead to them getting Braden Point signed and under contract, hopefully sooner than later. Now, next up, I want to talk about the Calgary Flames. Now, obviously, they don't have a ton of cap space left. They only have a little bit over $4 million, and they still have a big name in Matthew Tkachuk to sign. They also have Andrew Mangiapane as well to get signed, but Tkachuk's going to be commanding significant money, and they need to make some space available to accomplish that. Now, as we've discussed before, they do have some options and some players that are likely going to be traded. But there's a latest article on The Athletic written by Kent Wilson discussing what he feels is likely going to happen based on his knowledge of the situation and what his personal thoughts are. And he feels a player like Michael Frolik should be able to generate enough interest to move him off the books. His cap hit is $4.3 million, but his cash value of his contract this year is only $3 million. So the acquiring team would need to have the necessary space, but wouldn't have to pay him a full $4.3. So that might prove valuable here as well for some teams that may not want to spend as much. The UFA market's kind of shrinking down. There's not a ton of players with much value left out there, especially for forwards that can play top 6 or top 9 roles. So obviously there's a fair bit of teams out there might be looking to fill a spot or two within their roster that might find Frolik an attractive option on a short-term contract. Like I said, without having to spend big money, the Flames would obviously not want a ton of anything in return, probably a prospect or a draft pick. Something small would not take a lot for a team to acquire Frolik, just to mainly give the Flames the cap space. They fully understand they'd be trading from a point of weakness, but wouldn't be looking for a return of much. It's more than anything just to dump the salary. And they could still likely trade a defenseman. I don't think Travis Hamonic would be the guy. I think it's more likely to be TJ Brody. Wouldn't rule out the possibility of Michael Stone if they can find a taker for him. Both Stone and Brody both have 1 year left on their contract as well, and either one of them would free up a fair bit of space. Of course, Stone's making $3.5 million. Brody's making $4.65. Now, Brody was almost traded going over to the Toronto Maple Leafs before, but of course, Nazem Kadri's no trade clause certainly nixed that. So obviously, they came close to moving him already. I think he would be the preferred candidate that the Flames would like to swap out here. If they can do that and Frolik, plus what the space they have now allows them to sign Tkachuk and still have a little bit more flexibility here as they go into the season and not be too strapped and tight to the cap here. So let me know what moves you think the Flames are going to make. Where would be some good landing spots for these players so the Flames can free up the necessary cap space to sign Matthew Tkachuk? Now, jumping over to the Minnesota Wild, obviously we had some breaking news yesterday that they fired GM Paul Fenton after only 1 year. Many of us were surprised at the timing of this move. Really, you would think that if this was going to happen, it would happen near the end of the season or before the draft and free agency and all those things were underway. Obviously, you could tell based on the draft that it looks as though Fenton was kind of being watched closely by the owner, and a lot of things came out yesterday between an article from Michael Russo of The Athletic as well as comments from Leopold at his press conference indicating there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes with Fenton and how he treated his staff, but there was a lot of players that were unhappy, staff was unhappy, just how he was running things and he wasn't showing good leadership qualities, and this was very, very difficult to work with and kind of going against a lot of the culture that the ownership there had really worked so hard to create over the past decade or so. So obviously that's kind of what led to Fenton's dismissal. But right now there's a lot of talk about who might be the next GM, as they're likely going to be accelerating this search since we're so deep into the offseason. Many people feel that Leopold would like to have a new guy in place before September, before training camp opens. Obviously there's a big prospect tournament in Traverse City, and then of course you get training camp, regular season coming up, and really he shouldn't wait too long. Plus he's having hip surgery himself, I believe in early September as well. So he needs to have somebody in place sooner than later, and former Flyers GM Ron Hextall appears to be at the forefront. There was some rumors going around that they were already talking, but apparently that seems to be next year. Michael Russo confirmed that there has not been a meeting as of yet, but he has information to suggest that they've reached out to gain permission to speak to him, and they will be talking sometime soon. It'd be kind of ironic if he ends up there. Basically, him and Chuck Fletcher would have ended up swapping jobs and swapping cities there. But I'm not sure that Hextall would be a great fit. As much as I was a fan of what he did in Philadelphia, and I was not really pleased when Philly let him go, I really thought it was kind of unjustified. He was kind of building towards something really great in the future. But of course, ownership there was very impatient, and they wanted to win now, get back to the playoffs now. And so as much as he was doing a lot of great things with the prospect pool and drafting, developing, a lot of those, that was not fast enough for ownership. And really listening to Craig Leopold of the Wild seems to be a lot of the same things. I mean, he still says that this team is fully capable of winning and making the playoffs this year. He also believes quite heavily in the on-ice product, that they can be successful, and he wants to obviously build towards the Stanley Cup, which is kind of saying all the right things, but he seems to be somewhat impatient as well and wanting to win now, which is fine. I mean, it's great that you want to win now, but you have to be realistic with what you have, and I just don't think Minnesota's in that kind of situation. So with Hextall's approach that he took in Philly, they might not want that kind of approach in Minnesota. They may very well end up clashing and butting heads as well. And after this Fenton deal, with only having 1 year on the term before being let go, he really needs to get this right and make sure he hires the right guy. Now, some other names that are rumored to be in the mix that they're expected to be speaking to would be Tom Fitzgerald, assistant with the Devils. He, along with Fenton, were the finalists. That was boiled down to those two guys when Leopold hired Fenton here about 14 months ago. So he's expected to be asked for an interview as well. Of course, there's also some other guys in the mix, like even Peter Chiarelli, former GM of the Oilers, which is a little bit surprising after everything that happened there, but apparently his name is out there. I've heard a name of Dean Lombardi out there as well. I've heard of John Ferguson Jr. from the Bruins. So Bill Zito's name has been mentioned as well. So it's really hard to say who's going to end up being the next GM of the Wild, but I don't think it's going to take too long. I expect 2 to 3 weeks, likely have a decision in place, but many feel right now, based on chatter around social media, that Hextall is likely the favorite. But I guess we'll see. I see how it could be a great move by the Wild, but I also see how they could clash over Leopold's impatience to go through a proper rebuild and build this thing up from the draft. So I guess we'll see. The other thing with the Wild that makes it hard to do a full rebuild right now is they have so many longer term contracts with older players. To tear it down completely would not be an easy thing to do. So I guess we'll see how they proceed here. But let me know who you think would be the best candidate to be the next GM of the Minnesota Wild. So that is all your latest NHL talk and rumors here for today. Of course, as always, want to know your thoughts and opinions and everything we discussed here, and we'll continue the conversation down in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.